So let's get started. Thank you for coming this morning. I'm doubly thankful because the other session is called Cookies and Hash. And being from San Francisco, that probably means something different to my people than a lot of you who might be from Denver. Actually, it means the same thing there now. So thanks for showing up to API security. There's actually an interesting story behind this presentation, and I'm probably going to tell it anyway because we've got 55 minutes together, whether you like it or not. So I want to talk about end-to-end API security and all the standards I can shove into one slide, along with something I've been building at Ping called Project Permafrost. And it's been really stressful for me. I've been at Ping Identity for about a year now. And before that, I guess I've always had stressful jobs. Maybe that's why I'm an engineer. I was a startup CEO at a database company. I built some of the first large-scale distributed systems at companies up in the Seattle area. And I've basically done databases, big data, machine learning, really large and complex things for 10 years. And when Andre, the CEO of Ping, asked me to join the company, I was like, dude, I know nothing about identity except I get an OAuth token from Facebook, and it vaguely makes me angry because it feels really clunky. So that's what you're working with. He's like, great, you should build a developer evangelism program because developers know as much as you do about identity. So I felt good. And after a year, I'm kind of starting to understand some of it. So I have to say that starting at Ping was really stressful for me as a developer and as a former startup guy because I didn't know anything about identity. And when you Google identity-related things, you come out with a lot of specs as the first links. And as a guy who builds apps, 50-page specs don't enlighten me. They're scary. You Google and you find a bunch of vendor made-up terminology, find a bunch of vendor products, and you find a lot of really smart people writing awesome blog posts that aren't in code. And everything to me feels really theoretical until you put it in code and you see it working. And so my first year at Ping, I was like, guys, I'm totally lost. Like, we have all these great products, but how do they work? And how do they work is a very, very complex question that often got referred back to some specs. So over the past 2 weeks, I've said, all right, I know what it's like to be a developer who's completely lost in the world of identity. What can we build to make that better? And as you'll see, that's something I'm nicknaming Project Permafrost after a really awesome thrash metal album. So, identity is stressful. It's foreign to developers. A lot of developers, we're hackers, we're builders. We like to create things fast. We like to create things fast and recklessly. That's why Node.js and MongoDB exist. So when it comes to understanding the intricacies of identity, APIs, security, best practices, a lot of times that feels like extra work. When you could be building features that the business wants or could be building the next cool Twitter. Security often becomes an afterthought. And as we've seen, even at startups of smart people like Snapchat, when security becomes an afterthought and you don't do the most rudimentary things to secure your API, it makes you look terrible. And a few hours or days of an engineer's time could have saved them a few $1 million in valuation. So I want to help solve that problem. So the title of this talk is a little misleading because I had to give it 3 months ago and I've probably changed it in my head 50 times. But at the end of the day, I want to talk about API security, but from a developer's perspective, which I think is different than where a lot of us at CIS come from. We're security architects, we're technical architects, we're IT guys. We run PingFed or Okta or something else. And that's kind of the end of it. We might call a few URLs, but that's about it. But when you're building an app, and you may or may not even have a vendor you care about, it's a very different experience. And so I want to go through what it looks like to design API security at a really high level, but from a developer's perspective. And my goal here isn't to be complete. It's not to talk about the 7 or 8 different code flows through OAuth 2. I want to focus on the 1 or 2 things that are really important in every part of this identity stack, and give us all a starting place to talk about identity with developers, rather than pointing them towards an awesome blog post that Dale Olds wrote, or the OAuth spec. There's got to be something in between that's tangible. So a lot of this may be a refresher at the low levels of you guys, but I'm hoping what we can do is up-level the conversation a bit, look at these components from an engineer's perspective, and understand what it's like to actually build something from scratch that works end-to-end in a secure way that adheres to standards and protocols. So the good news is that this is a lot easier than it used to be. I haven't been coding for that long, relatively. I guess professionally been writing code for 12 years. But 12 years ago, it was terrifying. First of all, you probably weren't writing against APIs. You might have had some soapy XML stuff. And you were mostly doing logins across web sessions, hoping that your certificates were all lined up, and that was it. In some ways, it was a lot simpler. You didn't have IDPs or federation or anything like that, not at the scale you see today. There wasn't a connect with Facebook. I guess there was an early attempt. Maybe Google had a connect then. I think AOL tried something. Microsoft had their Passport. Actually, Passport probably died 10 years ago. But that's about it. And then I would say we went through kind of a tumultuous period, starting with the first generation of the Twitter and Facebook clients and OAuth 1, which I feel was very dictatorial and stringent and laid out way too much of how security protocols should work. And that's really confusing to developers because it feels like you have to adhere to OAuth 1 perfectly or you're not secure. And what if that doesn't meet your needs? You're hosed. And then we kind of went all the way to the other side with OAuth 2 and SCIM and OpenID Connect and JWT, which to varying degrees describe a lot of things and nothing. And at first I thought that was very bad, but now I actually see the light and I appreciate it a lot. But OAuth 2 just says, here's a couple different kinds of authentication flows. Here's, take a bearer token, do some stuff with it. I don't even care the token format. It seems like there's not a lot there. But if you adhere to the spec, it actually works. But that's the real problem is, as engineers, there's not a whole lot of good examples of adhering to the spec besides Google and maybe parts of Twitter and Facebook. So everything's a lot better now, I feel. We've got some standards. We've mostly decided on them. I think they're well documented from a theoretical standpoint. But they're just not turned into code yet. I can't go and get a reference implementation of an end-to-end API security framework without running into some vendor's BS. So what I've done in the past is, and I've seen this a lot, Snapchat was a victim of this, is trying to hand roll something out of pieces you like from OAuth or from JWT. One disastrous example I had, I was advising a company, and I had this cool idea. It was like, oh, we should put things in like a string and sign that string, and it can have like the user ID and all that stuff, and that way we can verify the token and then get some cool values out of it. Man, wouldn't that be a cool idea? So I wrote that and then quickly got nailed by like replay attacks because, of course, I screwed up the signing algorithm. And a lot of people, instead of wanting to read through a spec or consult blog posts, are going to hack out their own thing. So if nothing else, I think we've gotten to the point at an industry where we need to have tangible open source things that people can use and understand how all this stuff works. So let's talk about this stack from a developer's perspective. Skim, I have to say I actually prefer the old name for Skim. So compliments to you guys who came up with that. But to me, it answers the who. Right? If you think of the big question word, Skim and to another extent, OpenID Connect, it's all about the who. I think of Skim as just an API for user management. And that's kind of the theme. One of the themes I want to talk about today is developers sitting across from you at a table. How would I explain this thing? Skim's an API for user management, and it's really simple. It's kind of emergent though. You can do a lot of crazy complex stuff with it. But at the end of the day, I'm getting and posting some JSON to a URL that ends in users. And that's pretty intuitive. And I've got some, it's a cool standard, there's some inheritance, and there's really great provisioning things in there, which we've lacked in the identity field. But of course, if you try to Google Skim implementation today, you come up with one vendor's product, which is cool, and which I'll actually show today in a demo later. It's not a ping product. There's one implementation out there. It's in Java. It's written with Spring. It's very enterprisey. And a modern developer is going to look at that and just be like, what do I do with this? So we're just not there yet when it comes to Skim. But if you tell a developer, listen, it's an API, there's like 6 methods, you just make your requests in this way, and in a few years you'll be able to provision users anywhere in the cloud. That's a pretty powerful and cool thing. So talking about the rest of the stack, there's also OpenID Connect, and I see that as answering the other part of who. It doesn't handle creating or deleting or updating users. But it does get you metadata about the user in a way that's really tightly integrated with OAuth and simple to use. And so again, it's one of those things where we've put a lot of thought and research into it, but when you tell a person about it, it's like, hey, make a call to an endpoint after you've authenticated, and you get an ID token, and that ID token has a lot of great metadata that you can use for rules and routing and all the stuff you want in your API. And that's it. It can really be that simple. So in our framework of question words, OAuth 2, I like to explain as being the how. It's the protocol. Skim and OpenID Connect, they're things you pack into OAuth or layer on top of it or that ride along with it. And you make your OAuth calls, and they actually make the OAuth valuable with data. But OAuth actually controls the flows. And this is a really hard one. I thought about this for a while, and if anybody has a better one-sentence description of OAuth, I would love to have it. But I'd say it lets you prove who you are to a service without giving them your secrets. Right now, those secrets are passwords. I can't wait for passwords to die and have something better come along. I know Brendan's working on that. And a lot of us are working on that. But what it does do is it transports this, I call it profile data, from OpenID Connect and Skim servers. And at the end of the day, it gives you a token that lets you access APIs. Of course, there's so much more you can do with authentication flows, implicit flows, and all that with OAuth. But if you're a developer, what you're building today, most likely, it's an iPhone app. It's a single page, single page JavaScript app that doesn't do redirects. You're talking to APIs. You're not doing postbacks. You probably have asynchronous calls to the back end. A lot of the way modern apps are written is a small subset of what we can do with today's standards, which means that I feel that sometimes when we explain these standards to people, we tell them how amazing it is and how everything it can do so much, when really what an engineer wants to know is how do I do the Facebook login thing on my phone and then keep my API secure. So JWTs are a solution to the problem I talked about earlier that I thought it was very clever for inventing, signed tokens. I think of them as answering the what. they actually are the medium which conveys the data that OAuth 2 bridges between everything. So when you get your profile data from OpenID or from SCIM, as well as when you want that token that proves that, hey, I'm the guy who could talk to this API, that's what a JWT is. And it's really cool because you've got a base 64 string that encapsulates all the data, all your profile data in one place, so there's not multiple server calls on your front end. You're not shuffling around naked strings. And you can sign that, which I think is really cool. You can sign this with a symmetric key or anything else. And that way, the data becomes a little more sacred, for lack of a better phrase. You can trust it more. And I think it's an important cornerstone that a lot of people miss because I've seen so many botched token implementations. And if you give them a project like Jose or JWT or something like that, it's so trivial that for an engineer to implement this stuff, and their code becomes that much more secure. So it's kind of a recurring story here about making identity products a lot easier to use through open source. Which leads me to the thing I'm quasi-announcing today, which is something I've obsessed about for a few weeks, called Project Permafrost. And I'm going to demo it today, and there's going to be a lot of code, which I think is what some of us need. Certainly what I needed when I started in this field. And it's a really stripped down, end-to-end open source implementation of everything identity. I haven't written it all myself. I've culled from like 10 different open source projects. I've got some Jose in there. I've got some OpenID thing written in Node.js. I've got this enterprise-y SCIM implementation. But it's all there. And the purpose isn't to be a perfect identity framework. It's to say, hey, you're a developer. You may not know what SCIM is, or you may vaguely understand what OAuth is. Here's how it works. It all talks with REST APIs. You can make a call to any endpoint at any time, and you can feel the flow yourself. You can understand the path of the tokens and the journey and all that. So it's an open source framework, and I'll talk a little bit more about it. But it's trying to implement solid implementations, or I'm going to show solid implementations of the very tiny subset of the identity stuff that I think app developers care about, which is securing API-backed apps in mobile and single-page websites. So it's a bit of an involved demo, but I really wanted to show every aspect of this working together. So we're going to provision a user with SCIM. We're going to log into an app that's going to redirect you to an identity provider. You're going to get your access code, your access tokens, and all that. And then you're going to take these tokens to, I think I've got 4 different servers running on this EM, to a resource, just an API, that will accept the tokens and then filter and route requests accordingly without you needing to give it any explicit instructions. It's not complex, but I want it to be dead standard so it becomes the thing that you refer to when you're not quite sure how to do some aspect of this. Okay. Let's do the scariest thing in the world, which is a live code demo. So far, so good. Well, it's always interesting to see if my clock will actually update. So we'll see if that throws anything else off. Okay. So here's our mousey pad. I think I've removed all curse words from this, so it's family friendly. Okay, let's provision a user in a SCIM. Let's take a look, and I want to prove I am for reals here in industry parlance. So I'm going to try to show you the existing state of things as much as possible. Alt-tab. No. Cool. So got this REST console here. Can we see this? Cool. What is that? Nope, I don't want that one. Let's start a new one. Okay. So first, let's take a look, assuming it's still running, at Skim. So this is the power of Skim. It really is just an API. It may be backed by like LDAP and a complex server with routing and frameworks and stuff. But as a developer, all we really want to care about is the API. So let's see all the users in our system. Use a super awesome, secure, basic auth here. Hey, look at that. Cool. So, remember how much harder it used to be to like actually look at the users in your system? You'd have to go into LDAP and spend a few months understanding that, or go into Active Directory and scroll through a bunch of stuff. This is actually really impressive to me, to see this working. But hey, there's our user directory and a bunch of metadata. It's a lot easier than it used to be. Cool. So let's add something to, let's add a user. I once did a consulting gig for a telecom in Canada who wanted to build a distributed scalable replacement for LDAP. That was terrifying. It's a good old JSON call. Can't get easier than that. Let's post it. And what did I forget? Oh, forgot to tell it it was JSON. That's me, that's me. All right. There we go. And I'm a little ambitious. I'm just putting myself in there as Dr. Bradford Stevens. Mom would be really happy. And there we go. So when you create a new user, you see, again, proving it is for reals. Not a whole lot here, but here it generates you know, a bunch of metadata. I get a unique ID, adhering to these schemas. But you know, takes about 3 minutes to understand just getting the bare minimum done. And that's what I want to do. Just get the bare minimum done to prove that this is a real standard to a developer. Okay, great. So let's see our next step. No? Okay, we provision a user in a Skim, and now I think I've actually already got this user in OpenID Connect, so we can skip that. But let's go poke around at our OpenID Connect server. Let's see what we got here. Test, tokens, let's go to localhost 1/. Let's see, I'm not sure if I have a way to list users. I may not. No, okay, that's fine. All right, let's test this out. So we provisioned a user into Skim. It's been provisioned on the back end with just an API call and OpenID Connect. The standards say nothing about how that should actually work, only that it should work, which I like. It's test/clear. Okay, cool. So I want to keep this as simple as possible, but I'm not going to show every single JSON call because given the amount of trial and error and me maybe missing a parenthesis, we could be here a while. But I'm going to show you most of it. So let's do an you know, authorization code flow. Let's choose this B. Stevens guy. And let's choose our scopes. OpenID and profile. Randomly generated. Is that nonce and once? I never actually figured out how to pronounce that. Anybody? It is a nonce. Okay. Universal, huh? Cool. I'm redirected to do a login. You know, if you're a developer, you understand this. You're like, okay, I just hit the connect button on Facebook. It's redirecting me. That makes sense. Cool. All right. Got my code right here. Let me turn that into a token. Magic. And just like that, you've done your first authorization in a tiny little web form that maybe took 2 pieces of information to enter. And it's all open source. This is written in Node.js. So you can literally, like many things written in Node.js, just go hack on it instantly. And this solves a real problem I had when I wanted to research this is I kind of understood the specs. I like the idea of tokens and all that, but I couldn't figure out how they fit together. And once you actually say, hey, you just make a post with an authorization header and a bearer token, and bam, it's secure. That's nice. OK, so let's prove that this is for reals. We've got our access token. It's OpenID Connect profile. So we've got our ID token. And let's just take that access token and let us connect to our user info endpoint. Let's see, which one would that be? Here we go. That's API/user. Let's give it a bearer token. So this token contains information about me. So let us get it. And here we go. There is information from my user endpoint. But you may notice there's 2 sets of data here. That's because I'm combining the data from OpenID Connect and from Skim in one endpoint. Now what you can do with this that I don't have here is you could apply a really simple rules engine or routing engine. I think a lot of us have used products similar to this. But it's really easy in JavaScript to do things like match up given name field here to name field here or so on, family name to family name, and create a bridge between the Skim information and the OpenID Connect information. And that's actually really powerful because if Skim is a universal provisioning system and a universal way to maintain a profile, then over time it's going to evolve so that there's certain things we can always trust to be there from a Skim endpoint. And likewise, an OpenID Connect server that you connect to is probably going to have specific metadata about you as relates to Google or as relates to Facebook. So what Skim and OpenID Connect together do is basically provide us a global view of somebody. I can provision a person. I know that I'm provisioning the right person because it's from this trusted source. And then I can attach my metadata to it in one place. And with this project, it's easy for a developer to dive in there to get at this information, to create a little rules engine in JavaScript. And with Project Permafrost, they'll be able to be successful really quickly using these complex identity things that we've boiled down. All right, so we've already nailed, we've already shown the power of 3 of the 4 standards here in like 5 minutes with no crashes. I'm really happy. Let's go a step further, and I'm going to talk about, and this is where we kind of cross over from good standards to good software engineering practices to our server. Maybe this is it. Cool. This is not perfect code, but this is an example of our resource server and API client. This is, of course, not the best code, but I want to show how simple it is to have good API security. So this is written in Java. It's in a drop wizard framework. And it's basically meant to be a set of APIs that are secured by OAuth and JWT and provisioned with Skim users and all that. So it's really as easy. Inside, we've got We've got Jose in here somewhere. We've got servlets. So totally standard workflow for Java. And what these filters do is they filter every request header, and it checks for a bearer token. It authenticates your JWT token against your shared secret and your, the digest and all that. And then it breaks it into the parts you need. This is, again, ugly code that should be encapsulated, but you simply split something, and then you parse your JSON node, and you get out the email address, and you're done. So what this really simple program lets you do is basically view your token, and then it lets you provision a user, so to speak. Really just add an email address to an account, and then increment a counter. But it's all done in a secure way, and in a way that developers understand, and it's written in a way so that they can go and dig into the filter and be like, oh, it's just looking at a bearer token. I get this. I can do this. Let's see what my instructions say next. I hope I wrote down my tokens. OK. Let's take a quick look and see what's in our ID token. Just so, again, I can prove it is for reals. Hey, look at that. There's audience, there's the sub, and of course, this junk is from the signature. It's a messy decode. But this is the ID token we're passing around. I haven't put anything else in the OpenID Connect profile in there because I want to keep it really simple, and the email address is all we need. OK, first things, let's test to see if our token system is working by doing a little hello world. I want to keep that one around. That's person. Yeah, let's do this one. All right, I just kind of want to say hello to the world and poke around this system. Let's see what happens. Oh, I got to start my server. That would help. Always run your unit tests, even on stage. Yes. OK. Now, let's just say hello world to our API. Oh, you can't because they're not authenticated. Nice try, hacker. And of course, this should be a much more verbose error, but throwing a generic error is good enough now. So let's prove that we are for reals, and let's add our access token. And again, I could be doing this with the UI, but I want to make it as close to the metal as possible, because most modern developers are just writing JavaScript or Python scripts or something really quick, and they just want to hit the API and prove that it works. And they don't want to click through 20 or 30 dialogues. But of course, due to OAuth and all that, it's trivial to, say, plug in Google's OpenID Connect and then authenticate against Google instead. So it's a bearer token. Hope I didn't miss anything on copy paste. And now let's say hello world. Hey, that's B. Stevens, mappingidentity.com. Oh, I also threw my ID token in there. That's it. So now we're doing authentication stuff. Let's take a look at what this database has in store for me. Doing a get. and hey, that's my entry. But notice, and if you think about it, this is actually kind of a big deal from how we did things a few years ago. I've got my tokens, my ID token and my access token, but I actually haven't told it explicitly who I am. I haven't said this is bstevens@pingidentity.com. It's encoded in the tokens. And therefore, you can design your API framework to be totally agnostic to that and say, hey, you don't have to indicate, and this is a big vulnerability in a lot of APIs, you don't have to indicate who you're doing the action to because it's already implied in the token. That lessens the surface area a lot, and it's a nice API design strategy. So we've gotten who I am, and now let's just update that number. Cool, success. But what does that mean? It means that now my count is 5 and my journey is complete. So what this basically demonstrates is that you can roll out something that resembles a secure API framework in Java. I pulled a bunch of open source stuff into this, but had to wire it up and fix some bugs myself. But still, you're not looking at a lot of classes to just filter out your requests, to pull those tokens out, stuff like that. And everything you've seen is contained in a single, contained in a single VM in a single GitHub pull request. And it starts up with a single, well, soon to be single Python script or bash script. So the goal here, and I want to evolve this over time, is to enable any developer to get their hands in and to see that identity flow all the way from Skim through OAuth and through everything else, and then be able to go from there and with a few clicks plug in the Google Connect or the Facebook Connect or so on. And I think this is really going to help bridge the gap between where we are with these great standards and great, really complicated vendor projects and where we want to be, which is a community of developers who, as a whole, basically understand that OAuth is a thing with tokens and get them to a point where, as vendors, we can actually have intelligent conversations with developers who come to us and say, hey, I need this implementation for this and this federation because I built it all myself in this little demo, and now I see the power and I understand what I really need. And so I'm hoping we can up-level the conversation and not just, as an industry, talk to IT guys, security guys, and enterprise developers, and start talking to where a lot of people start out in this industry is building iPhone apps and building little web pages, and help them understand that security is important and easy because we've done a lot of the heavy lifting for you. So, it was my goal to be able to explain this in 30 minutes. I went to 40, so I'll handle that. But, yeah, come on. Keep going. This is not dignified. So that's that. This will be up at github.com soon. It's called Project Permafrost. And at the end of the day, pull requests are really happily taken. And I just want to make it simple for developers to understand identity because they are so far behind the curve. And this benefits all of us in the industry. And I would love suggestions. I've only been doing this for a year. I know a lot of you have been doing it for way more. So I'd love suggestions on how to keep this lean and minimized and visible and working from end to end so that anybody can download it in just a few clicks, be on the way to writing far better code. Any questions?
So once you release this, is there going to be some, I guess, sort of tutorials to help the devs along? Or is that coming? Are you going to use some help writing tutorials?
I could use help writing that. I mean, yeah, right now my tutorial is that mouse pad with my curses carefully taken out. So yes, could definitely use help with tutorials. I'm hoping in some ways that it's more of a tutorial on what data there is there rather than how you use it, because it's SCIM and OAuth, and we should understand how to use it. And I think if we've done our job as an industry, it'd be really great. This is kind of how I tested this so far, is to read the spec and then bang against my API and say, did this work the way the spec does? So that's how I'd like to see it, but definitely need help with tutorials or, you know, making it easy to plug in other authentication modules and stuff like that. It's certainly, it's not meant to be production grade for anything, but it's meant to be, you know, a nice tool that I feel that we've been missing in the industry.
Are you thinking or saying that dot token format is the de facto format to use going forward?
I feel it is. It seems to be what most of the big players have standardized on. And I want to focus on what makes developers successful with things they know about. So if understanding JWT means the developer now knows what's going on with Facebook and Google and all that, that's a win to me. I don't know enough about the token game to say whether or not JWT has flaws or something I don't know about. But this isn't about being semantically correct. It's about making developers feel empowered and successful. So yes, JWT. What else? Five more seconds of uncomfort. Great. Thank you so much. Let's get you set up.